This is my second time in Dublin, and actually second time happened to have, to present after Neil. He's a goddamn good presenter. So I hope I am not gonna bore you out. Before talking about what I'm gonna talk about, my name is Amir. I am co-founder at a startup called Unbody, based in Netherlands. We are building a AI native backend stack, open source. You can find me on Twitter as well as LinkedIn. I'm not going to talk about Unbody too much. It might come across when I'm going along the slides, but the focus of today is going to be about how to manage generative data when it comes to UI, how to deal with the state when it comes to generative data, known as AI-driven data or whatever you want to call it. But then when I was thinking about presenting this concept or topic, I was thinking maybe generative data is a very vague kind of concept. So I was looking for a kind of analogy to put it against that, for you to also make sure that you understand it better. So we all know CRUD, like CRUD APIs. Who in this room have built an API, like a CRUD API? Okay, pretty much everyone. And who has built anything with generative AI, like implemented generative AI-driven backends? Okay, a few. But okay, let me make it more clear. When we talk about generative data, we are talking about a bunch of buzzwords. A lot of different things can fall into this category. For example, we can talk about RAG, function calling, agentic flows, and chatbots, etc. You name it. So now let me ask the questions. Who has built any of these implications of generative data in this room? I'm going to ask questions. You sure? Okay, cool. No, I was kidding. So the ratio is still low. Why is that? Is because we are mainly in a React, basically talk, and a lot of us coming not from a machine learning background, and these sort of buzzwords are still buzzwords. And we really, to be honest, don't need to deal with them as long as we are not machine learning engineer, but we need to know how to use them. For the sake of simplicity for today, I'm gonna go with RAG. And don't worry if you don't know what RAG is, but I'm gonna ask the question, who know what RAG stands for? Yes.
Retrieval augmented generation.
Perfect. Yes, that's correct. But now let's see what the heck RAG is really is. Retrieval augmented generation is a technique behind ChatGPT, Cloud, Perplexity probably. You've heard about, or any sort of like even Cursor, any sort of AI application that you see out there that is working based on a specific knowledge base, based on a specific data set, it's called RAG. Or the base technology is RAG. But let me break it down. So basically, you have a set of documents or set of records in the database, etc., and you want to basically ask questions, or you want to chat with that data using natural language. So what you do, you basically, the first part is about searching or retrieve the related information to that particular question or prompt or user query that you have. So for example, find me all the pizzas that doesn't have garlic in it, for example, right? This needs to go along and retrieve all the pizza records that are about, like, not having garlic, about pizza, etc. Make a collection and give it back to us. So at this point, the retrieval part is done. Now, we send the retrieval part. So this basically creates a context, narrow down the context, and then we feed it to a LLM, to a large language models, and you say, hey, this is your context, this is the user query, figure it out, generate the response. So at this point, we augmented that extra retrieved information as a context to the model, and the model generates a response for it, right? This is basic workflow of a RAG. I hope this is clear for whoever didn't know, and now you know, hopefully. And if you don't know, please just ask and I can explain again. Now, let's go back to our topic. So, generative data versus CRD or crowd, or RAG versus crowd. There are a couple of differences. First difference is about the workflow. And I'm now talking about completely from front-end engineering point of view, about UI point of view from this moment on. We are not talking about the backend. You saw how backend works. The first thing that is different between these two types of creatures is the workflow. And in a crowd API call, basically, we are dealing with a one-shot API call. You send a request to the server, you get a response back, not much happening, maybe single event, right? There is not, that's it, it's a one-shot. Versus something like RAG, these are two different workflows for two different types of a RAG. On top, what you see is a basic RAG. So user query comes in, retrieval happens, then generation happens, and you get the response. The difference here we see, upon each stage, we need to update the event. We need to send an event. We need to let the UI know that, hey, I have done this part of the process, and now I'm moving to the next. Those are the same labels that you see in, for example, ChatGPT, thinking, reasoning, finding information. You know, they call it different labels, or Cursor has it as well. But each of these is a stage in the RAG pipeline, basically. And therefore, it's not a one-shot. It's a multi-stage. And more interesting, when it comes to the generation itself, it's also split it into, you know, a stream. It's split it into the chunks. So you don't get one response back. You get the whole response over the time split it in various chunks. At the bottom, I hope at the end you can see it, it's a bit more advanced RAG, something that you might have heard of, Agentic RAG workflow. What is the difference here is that you start hooking different middlewares or agents into the pipeline. For example, instead of sending the user query directly to the retrieval model or engine, what I do, I add an agent here that we call it, for example, in Unbody, we call it query parser agent. What responsibility this has is that to take the user query and extract the parameters that are matched with the database, for example, extract filter, extract topics, concepts, determine what's the intention of the users, etc., etc. And then it basically optimizes the retrieval process. So the semantic search or even keyword search can be managed better and more autonomously. Or for example, once you retrieve the information, you can again apply re-ranker on top of it, meaning that to go and resort and re-rank based on a specific criteria or a specific parameter. And same for after generation, for example, you can validate the response from the model. If it's good, if it's not, send it back using different methods. I'm not going to go into the technicalities. And then once you have the response, the same thing, you need to start a new stream. Am I not going too fast? Everything? Okay. All right. The second difference is delivery. As I mentioned, the data comes in chunks and over the time versus, you know, the crowd API, it sends you a package and you unwrap it, you take your gift out, right? There is nothing to do. But here, there is no one parcel package. It comes in shreds. Like piece by piece it comes and you need to handle it. And this is common among when you work with any sort of transition-based models. There are many different various versions, for example. But what you see often, this is how the majority of the models, how they work. And it's called auto-regression text-based. And for example, OpenAI, Google Gemini, Cloud, Cohere models, all of those are basically working based on auto-regressive part. That one part, it comes token by token in a particular sequence. Or we have different type of other models, for example, non-monolithic text. And this is more like still at the experimental stage. Some of the labs are starting to picking it up. And in this case, the model not only predict the next word, but it also predict the place and the index of it in the text. And it also changes over the time. And of course, the famous diffusion images, it's basically, these are a different type of model that they kind of iterate over one response. So they give you one basic response, then iterate, make it better, better. But what they all have in common, as you can see, there is no waterfall, one one-shot delivery. It comes, as time goes, and you need to deal with it. As a front-end engineer, the data is not, hey, here's the whole JSON data, go and parse it or make a UI. You need to make your UI adaptive to that. And the third difference, which is very important on a more, yes?
So I was saying like between the crowd and the RAG. So which one is parcel and which one is drip?
Which one is parcel? The crowd is parcel because it's just one package parcel. Delivery parcel is like the parcel versus drip is the analogy I came up with. Yeah, it's like one thing comes at your door, you take it and you unwrap it, right? It's like a payload comes in at once, all at once. Sorry, I broke your kind of setup. The third one is about, this is my favorite because, and I put a lot of thinking into this to come up with a very nice metaphor. I think it's about crowd API versus generative data or generative APIs is about basically facts versus a story. When you have where you're dealing with an endpoint, like a crowd endpoint, when you have, for example, you want to get all the profiles in your database, it doesn't matter how many requests you say, you always get the same exact response because it's coming from hard-coded facts. But models, like humans, that's the whole idea with artificial intelligence. We're trying to make them more like us, unpredictable, and with hopefully some point with autonomy. And that's the reason. Every time you send a request, doesn't matter your syntax and the type of the request is the same. The parameters can also be the same, but the type of response you get every time is different. So unpredictability is another key to this difference. So you need to know, okay, the data is not coming as I expect always to be with the same. Of course, there are ways to make it with the same schema, et cetera, that I can talk about it later. But the point is that the type of the content itself can change, and you need to be ready for it. And you need to make sure that user get the consistent experience. Otherwise, it's just not useful. So now let's talk about how we address these kind of differences. Because we need to adjust our mindset, we need to adjust our workflow to be able to basically respond to these differences. We cannot apply the same rules that we apply to when we are working with Crowd API to the same time that we are working with generative data APIs. So the first thing that is very important is to keep the context because it's the source of truth. That's where you can control the flow as much as you can when it comes to LLMs. And what is the context? Imagine the RAG again. Let's say the user query comes in. It goes and gets all the relative information. Now, instead of sending these directly to the generator, we create a context, including user query, the history, all the previous messages, all the previous payloads, all the previous discussions, even the time span, etc., including the retrieved data. We put them all together, store them somewhere in the memory, wherever you want to implement it, and then send it to generative module. So every time that you call generative module, you give it the context. You provide it a much richer context. This way, for example, the model knows, oh, okay, previously I answered to this exact same questions. Why? Now let me try to answer it differently or maybe similar, depending on your instructions. So the context really matters. The other thing that we need to make sure we do, and this might come obvious, but it's important that we understand it, why there are these buttons that you see. As I said, the data comes in chunks, and we know all the models, the whole business model is basically designed around the idea of token by token cost. You pay per token. You don't pay per API call. So it's important to give the user the control to be able to stop or to be able to abort the whole request, because the user is paying for every single token. So you should be able to you should enable the users to be able to cancel the request at any point of the time that they want. They might not happy with the response that they are getting so far, so they want to refresh it. which comes back again to the middle part that I told you that we know that every time the model can generate a new response. So we need to also give the possibility for customizing the answers or getting different answers from the model. That's why we need to have a retry logic as well. In the code, I will dive in later, but just to show, so you can implement it in various ways. For example, with abort controller, you can, of course, have to abort the stream. And you can also, for the retry, is basically triggering the generative part. And when you put them all together, it's basically, you need to make sure that whatever hook you make to use the RAG or whatever, implementation you have, it should have the cancel and retry for sure. That goes without saying. All right, now let me see, what do I have next? Yeah. Okay. Now I need to go to the code, or maybe before going to the code, I need to test this thing. Okay. Let me show you all in one. Okay. This is like a demo I made a few weeks ago, I guess. So what this does, basically, this is an agentic RAG built on top of any given website. So you give a website to Unbody behind the scene, Unbody go and process the data, creates basically a second brain or knowledge base for you, and you can build this chatbot on top of it. All the things that I told you is implemented in this, and later we go into the code and we see how it all comes together. Anyhow, so there are like already pre-generated questions based, and for this demo, I gave it Unbody website. So it crawls all the Unbody website and processes it all, and it generates these questions. I can also ask my own questions, but let's go with one. For example, I don't know, one of these. Oh no, sorry, this is not Unbody. This is another website. Anyway, let's go with this. I don't know, I might have changed it. Anyway, so you see the states, thinking 6 results already, and the streaming comes in. There is also a stop button. It was too fast, but and you can see this is the context. All the pages that has been crawled is part of the context. Also, the previous messages are part of the context. And let's again go with, for example, how this can happen, and then I can, at any point, I can stop it. Understanding, searching the knowledge base, thinking, generating, stop, abort, I'm not paying more, right? So basic logics might come obvious when you are using it, but it's important that you as a React developer, as a front-end developer, to think about these sort of things. It's very important. Now let's go to the code. Okay. Just quickly to show you. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to show you quickly about the backend, but that's not the point of this talk. So basically, Unbody comes with this agentic RAG that it's very small, right? Should I make it bigger a bit? So the agentic RAG, you see, send it all the agents, Q agents, basically, that's the query parser, retrieval agent, generated agent, and that's it. And then you basically RAG.stream. Every time the query comes in, you send also the conversation history signal, and the signal is coming from basically this is Next.js, so request comes with the signal of a control here. And then you pass down basically the stream. All right, now this is the backend. You don't need to be worried about. Now let's go how we use this. So in the backend, in the front end, this is what I was telling you. This is use, for example, use RAG hook or use agentic RAG. You can see it has a state, a query, and also obviously shows if the whole pipeline is still processing or if it's idle. Progress, that's basically the percentage. We are not using it, and history and cancel. I didn't have time to implement the retry yet. And when basically, when the data comes in, we just put it together and we render it. Let's go also look at how this hook is built. What is very important, you keep the state of history for sure. And connection state, it depends. Basically, that's for usually creating the first connection to the API. It's optional, you can have it or not. And abort control, which is very important. And of course, listeners. And those are very important. Let me go to them. State is more important. So the state basically comes in stages. For each stage has its own basically a state. Again, this is the way how I implement it. It's up to you how you want to implement it. This is not the point of this talk per se, but it's important that you know at what stage you are, and for every stage you need to have a payload and you need to have a status. And once it's complete, or how do you deal with the history as well? Yeah, this is pretty much. Yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to talk about. And yeah, I think, second, I'm gonna go to. Yes, so thank you very much. As I said, we just became open source. I guess last year when I was in Dublin, we were not open source, but now we are. We are fully Apache 2. So go ahead, take it down, break it apart, do whatever you want. If you want to join the community and contribute, please go ahead with the scanning the right code. And if you want to get the code that I just showed you and dive into it, scan the left one. And if, I don't know, thank you so much. If any questions, happy to answer.